Hi everyone, today I want to show you how to make apple pie macaroons. I'm just going to say right now that I'm going to call them macaroons because I can't pronounce it the proper way in French. It's apple season coming up and apples are like my favorite fruit, so I love trying to bake with them and making creative things with apples. And an apple a day keeps the doctor away, so it's always good to have your apple. By the way, in this recipe I'll show you sort of a non-traditional way of making macaroons because I didn't have enough icing sugar, but I still really wanted to make them, and usually macaroons take a lot of icing sugar and very little granulated sugar. So in this recipe I use mostly granulated sugar, and I'll teach you how to do it in case you run out of icing sugar as well. So let's begin. For the ingredients, you'll need 40 grams of egg whites, 4 grams of dried apples, 50 grams of ground almonds, also called almond flour, and the sugar combined you need 118 grams. And usually most of it will be icing sugar, and then you'll have about 40 grams or so of granulated sugar. But in this case, because I ran out of icing sugar, I only had 18 grams left, so I used 100 grams of granulated sugar. And then for the spices, you need a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon and a pinch of ground nutmeg. First thing you want to do is to crush your apple chips. So I found the easiest way for a small amount is just to put it in a plastic bag and then use a rolling pin and then just crush the apple chips into a fine powder. Like I said, I'm using freeze-dried apples here, but you can also use regular apple chips that are oven-dried, and you can dry your own apples as well. So as long as it's crisp and can be ground into a powder, it'll work. Now we can sift together the dry ingredients. So there's 50 grams of ground almonds, 18 grams of icing sugar, whereas normally I would add about 65 grams or so, but this is all I had, so it's all going to go in. And then the crushed apple powder that we just made. And so since these are apple pie macaroons, I'm adding some spices that you normally add to apple pie. So a pinch of ground nutmeg and a bit of ground cinnamon. And I didn't actually use a spoon to measure them out. I mean, as long as you don't dump a lot in, it's not too important. That is exactly a 1/4 teaspoon. And so stir to mix all the dry ingredients. The point of stirring is to eliminate the lumps. So if you have any sort of larger granules of almond flour or apple chips or anything else left, you can just throw that out. So now it's time to work on the meringue mixture, and I have a lot of words here, but I'll try to explain it. Basically, we need to dissolve a lot of sugar, 100 grams of sugar, in a tiny amount of egg whites, which is 40 grams of egg whites. And so we need to add some heat just to help the sugar dissolve more easily. And the way we do that is over a double boiler. So I have some water that's just covering the bottom of a pot, so that's a glass pot with the handle sticking out, and then I have a metal bowl with the egg whites and the sugar over it, and I'm having the water just on a gentle simmer so that the steam comes up and warms the egg whites and the sugar. So I'm just stirring it with a whisk until the sugar dissolves, and this takes a couple of minutes. When the sugar has dissolved, you can stick your finger in and it won't feel gritty. You can't feel the sugar granules, and that's how you know the sugar has dissolved. So now we're ready to whip the egg whites. I'm attaching the whisk back to my electric whisk because this is such a high concentration of sugar. Normally I would make macaroons completely by hand, but because we have such a high concentration of sugar here, it's going to be really stiff, so I suggest using an electric whisk for this. So now, after a couple minutes, the meringue is not really at a firm peak, I guess. It's more of a sort of medium peak, but it's very stiff when you stir it, and you know that it's going to hold the air quite well. So I'm just going to remove my beaters and scrape it all off because precision does matter. You can't really lick them off or else you're going to be missing parts of your ingredients. So now I'm going to just add all the dry ingredients to the egg whites as you normally would, and then just stir. And it's okay to sort of squish the egg whites around. It's gonna look really dry and you won't think it's gonna come together, but it will. So just keep stirring and go ahead and squish the egg whites, deflate it a bit. So once you see that all the dry ingredients have been combined with the egg whites, we're going to start looking for the perfect consistency. And that's sort of a molten lava consistency, so I'll try to show you. You can tell that there's still quite a bit of volume in the egg whites at this point, so you really want to squish down the volume a bit, and as you do so, you'll notice that the batter becomes smoother and runnier. So I'm trying to get that perfect consistency as it falls off the spatula, and right now nothing is falling off, so it's still too stiff and we need to keep stirring. Usually whenever you use a method of making macaroons where you have to heat the egg whites, so whether by making an Italian meringue or sort of like a Swiss meringue in this method, you'll have to stir a bit more. It's going to be really hard to over stir it and get a batter that's too thin, whereas if you make it by the French method, it's a lot easier to over stir, and I can show you that in another video. So let's check again, and it falls off the spatula but kind of gloppy, so not really there yet, and giving it another couple of stirs. And let's check again. So it's almost there. You can see it's still gloppy, but more of a ribbon as it falls down. I'm gonna give it a couple more stirs. Again, if you're doing it by the French method, and I'll show you that in another video, you don't want to stir this vigorously. So it's coming down almost in one fluid stream, but not really there. So we're going to check again, and at this point the batter is almost a continuous ribbon. It's almost there. I want to stir it a bit more, just because if it's still just a little bit stiff, it'll be really hard to tap out the air bubbles later on, so you might get cracks. So to be on the safe side, I'm just going to stir it a couple more times. And there you go, it falls down in a smooth ribbon without being gloppy, so now it's ready to be piped. And don't forget, when you're piping and extruding the batter through the small piping tip, it's almost like you're stirring it again as you pipe, so really try not to over stir it, and this is the right consistency to stop at. Have my piping bag ready. It's just a disposable plastic piping bag. I have it in a cup just so that it's easier for me to transfer my batter into the bag, and the tip that I'm using is a Wilton 12. It's about 7 millimeters in the tip part of it in diameter, or about 1/4 inch. So I am just going to make sure I squeeze all the air out of the top of the piping bag, otherwise it's going to make odd noises when you start piping. I have a piece of parchment paper. This is the second use because I don't want to throw parchment paper away. So I've used it for a batch of cookies, and then I've washed it, and then now it's all wrinkly, but that's okay. So normally if you're making macaroons to give away, you usually want to use a silicone pad or a silicone baking sheet, because the wrinkly parchment paper is going to give you wrinkles at the bottom, but that's okay. I'm just serving it to family and they understand. So just piping, you can go straight from the top or sort of slant it to the side if you want. Sort of keep your piping tip at about, I guess, 1/4 inch to not so much 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch off the paper, and then just keep squeezing. You don't have to move your piping tip up as you go. The batter will spread around the tip. And this way you get a perfect circle. Unless you have wrinkly paper like I do, then the wrinkles sort of push the edges of the macaroons, but that's okay. So now we're going to tap out the air bubbles, so you can either drop the sheet on the counter or just tap from the bottom of the baking sheet, and then you have to let it rest for at least 20 minutes. If the weather is dry, up to an hour if it's sort of a rainy day. So it's about 20 minutes later, and I'm just testing to see if the skin has formed by gently touching one of the macaroons. And it should feel squishy, might feel some powdered sugar, but it shouldn't stick. If it sticks, then you have to let them sit for another half an hour or so. So I'm just sprinkling some cinnamon over the top for decoration, and then I'm going to bake them at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, about 150 degrees Celsius for about 15 minutes. It's safer to check at 12 minutes, just in case. And this is my favorite part. Around like the 7 to 8 minute mark, they just magically rise up and develop the feet, which is the sort of wrinkly edge along the bottom. Now that they're baked, you can allow them to cool just on the cookie sheet. And to check whether they're done or not, after they've cooled for about 5 minutes, try to lift them off the sheet. If it completely sticks, then you need to bake them for a bit longer. If they come off, then you're good to go. So I know this video mainly concentrates on just making the macaroon cookies, but I'll show you how to make the filling as well, the apple pie filling. It's a very basic apple pie filling, so I'm just going to finely dice an apple. So adding the diced apple in a microwavable bowl, because we're going to cook it in the microwave. So I am adding a bit of cinnamon, some sugar. There's no real amount to this. I think I added about 2 tablespoons or so. A bit more cinnamon, some salt, and a squeeze of lemon juice. And then just microwave on high for a minute or so to soften the apples. You might want to cover it. Then we're going to thicken the mixture by using a slurry, so a tablespoon of cornstarch and a tablespoon of cold water. Stir it together and then stir it into the hot apples, and then microwave again until it bubbles over. Add a pat of butter, and then just let the mixture cool before you sandwich the cookies. So the macaroons have also cooled now. It's time to do some macaroon matchmaking, which basically means you want to find pairs that are roughly the same size and shape. If you're really good, then that won't matter. They will all be the same size and shape. But for me, with the wrinkly paper and a little bit of inconsistent piping, you have to sort of match them together. So just about 2 teaspoons or so of filling, or maybe a teaspoon, and then just press the cookies together, and you have a really nice apple pie macaroon. So as you may or may not know, for macaroon cookies, you do have to let them sit and let the moisture absorb into cookie for a couple hours in the fridge before you eat them. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have questions or comments, and like and subscribe if you like these videos. I also have Instagram, so you can follow me there too.